Hello. Hi, everybody. Thanks for walking down the stairs with us or coming down in the elevator. Again, my name is Roz, and I think everyone was at the dance performance, so I'll spare you that second introduction. I'm honored to welcome you to this space where we're gathering at Williams College, which we respectfully acknowledge sits on the ancestral homelands of the Stockbridge Munsee Mohicans, who are the indigenous peoples of the region now called Williamstown. Following tremendous hardship after being forced from their valued homelands, they continued as a sovereign tribal nation in Wisconsin, where they reside today. We pay honor and respect to their ancestors, past and present, as we commit to building a more inclusive and equitable space for all. Tonight, we're here to celebrate an incredible new book called Dance We Must, The Art and Costumes of Ruth St, Denis and Ted Shawn, 1906 to 1940, which documents and questions WCMA's 2018 exhibition by the same name. The exhibition was the result of a thoughtful and productive partnership between Jacob's Pillow and the museum. And the book includes contributions from our curator, Dr. Kevin M. Murphy, and Dr. Caroline Hamilton, who worked together to co-curate the exhibition and co-edit the book, as well as Erica Dankmeyer, Hanali Muschetti, Norton Owen, Tandy Steele, and Dr. Munjulika R. Tarah. Both the 2018 exhibition and now the book reflect on the value of archives as a critical resource for studying the troubled and troubling histories of dance, art, and culture in the early 20th century United States and beyond. In this portion of the program, we're going to hear from a number of book contributors as they unpack some of the questions they've grappled with throughout this project. The conversation will be moderated by our lovely Williams colleague, Sandra Burton, who is among many roles and attributes, the Lipp Family Director and Chair of Dance at Williams College, and frequent collaborator here at WCMA. The panelists include Erica Dankmeyer, Artist in Residence at Williams College and contributor to the book, Caroline Hamilton, a dance and costume historian who has worked extensively with the Jacob's Pillow Archive, Kevin M. Murphy, Eugenie Prendergast, Senior Curator of American and European Art here at WCMA, and Munjulika R. Tarah, Assistant Professor of Dance and Theory at Williams College, also contributor to the book. So please stay for the toast and snacks to follow this conversation, where we're going to hear more thank yous from our museum director, Pam Franks. And the book is also going to be for sale, so perhaps you'd like to buy it after you hear this conversation. And with that, please shift your attention over to Sandra and the panelists on stage.
Thank you, Roz. So our intention is to have a conversation with each other that will also engage you. At this point in your living, my assumption is that you have packed and unpacked a bag, perhaps many bags, perhaps huge trunks. And so part of this process with Dance We Must has been unpacking things that were packed in another century, things that unearth passions, ideas, outrage, inspiration, and a glimpse, perhaps, of the past and the future. So the 2018 exhibition represented, in my opinion, a display of the travel, the research, the collecting, and the passions of dance icons, St. Denis and Ted Shawn. This unpacking offered and continues to offer us an opportunity for multi-generational conversations that examine important perspectives on the display and contextualizations of objects, costumes that represent cultures and embodied knowledge of people that St. Denis and Ted Shawn sometimes and often were not. My question to the panelists is, well, to the people who are conversing today, is what deeper impact did the engagement, your engagement, with what was in the trunk offer you in your research, your teaching, your curating, and creative projects? And anyone can begin.
Well, maybe I should begin because I was the person literally opening the trunks at the beginning of this project. So when I came on board, it was January 2018, and I was working as a fellow at Jacob's Pillow, and there were 33 of these very large, in some cases, huge steamer trunks in the basement full of costumes. So as part of this project, what we were able to do was literally opening these trunks that had been Norton Owen had done a great job in knowing roughly what was in them. They were stable, but the full inventory hadn't been done, and they really needed to come out of those trunks. So my job was literally opening these, pulling these items out, working out what they were. A very interesting smell permeated the archive for quite a long time. They had been sealed for a long time. Those shipping trunks last very well. But really trying to work out what these pieces were, cataloging them, identifying them, storing them in acid-free boxes. But at the same time, Kevin was visiting and doing a similar thing, looking at a lot of the photographs. I'm sure he's going to talk about that. But we were then I was sort of coming and saying, what about this piece? Seeing what was in there, and then with the idea of what could be used in the exhibition. But really it was an amazing process, very quick to be sort of literally pulling all these things out and seeing what was there and working out what it was, because in some cases we didn't know. So that was quite an amazing process to be already thinking of an exhibition in mind, because often when I work on this kind of collections, it's just for storage and for preservation and to go in a catalogue, which is fantastic, but to know that there was going to be a way of showing and using these pieces. And I think that's, for me, the really important bit is using costumes as a primary source, which is becoming more and more used in dance research, but up until relatively recently, it hasn't been. They've been used as an illustrative one. So actually being able to use these costumes in a different way was really exciting. So.
Yeah, the winter of 2018 will be the winter of mouse urine for me in terms of smells. So I think in terms of lessons, right from the beginning, for me, having access to an archive that has largely been sort of unpublished as a scholar is catnip. That's what you live for, right? You live for these kind of archives and these moments that, where you have, sort of access and thanks to Norton, unfettered access to an archive that, had been processed, but not necessarily really well known, well published, and I think there was the portion that was the kind of discovery portion for us, where we were working in different rooms, and I would find a photograph, and I would run in and say, like, didn't we just see this, and vice versa. So that part of it was it. In terms of sort of the archival research, it was incredibly exciting. And I think that, we will probably talk a little bit more about this as we talk about the exhibition, but, I think that the zealousness, of which one can kind of try to attack an archive because it hasn't ever been attacked before, it may be something that in the future I consider a little bit kind of more about, rather than just being like, this is exciting material and it's not been published, and oh my God, and we have, and someone who was trained as an Americanist with a strong interest and knowledge of material cultures, I was very much with Caroline on the fact that these costumes are these primary source materials, just as anything that I was looking at, and so there was just that the fact that textiles are not all the time used, maybe more now, but thanks to scholars like Caroline, but it was so exciting. And then, the excitement that we felt, was one that I think I'll probably think twice about maybe. And next time I get unfettered access to an amazing archive if that ever happens again.
Thank you, Kevin. So you both mentioned that you went right to the costumes and less, to the objects. And so I'd like to invite Erica and Munjuli to really talk about what these costumes represent. They were lived in, they were used, they represent the embodiment of cultures and ideas. Can both of you talk about that?
I'm not sure if this is on.
I think it is.
Can you hear me? Okay. Oh, yeah. So the idea that these costumes were sort of lying fallow for all these years really fascinates me. I'm sort of an archive nerd. I like to dig through old books and old photographs and materials like that. So being able to see, not touch, but see some of that material was really very visceral for me, because as a dancer, what it helped me do, to kind of go back to your first question, was to really examine this legacy that is a part of me. It's part of my body. I come from the Martha Graham tradition. Martha Graham was hugely influenced by Ruth St. and Ted Shawn. Ted Shawn is really the person that launched her whole career. And she worshipped St. Denis and continued to really through her life, even though her work was very, very different than the Denis Shawn work that she started in. And so I think I felt really in my body, as much as anything, this connection, and also this, of course, discomfort. Mm-hmm. And the embodiment of the costumes, and imagining, kind of knowing how that might feel when you're moving in it, and seeing that the sweat stains are there, and knowing that these are really used objects. They really existed in time and space in a different way. Gave me a really interesting connection to history. And because I have had a long career in, classic modern dance tradition, and have done a fair amount of reconstruction and also just reperforming works, it felt like a moment where I really had to examine my own history in dance in a way that I hadn't really before. So it was really an incredible opportunity for me to go deeper, think about the connections, recognize the things that I didn't know yet, that I still needed to learn, and also the things that I wanted to learn through embodiment, because that's part of what we do as dancers, is that we do research in our bodies, right? That's part of what's important to us. It's important to our department that we include that in our research. And so it opened those doors for me, and has really allowed me to sit in a discomfort, right? Which is, that is fine. That is what it is. And that won't change. But I'm learning more the more I'm digging into it myself. And that I really value.
Thank you, Erica. Munjuli?
Yeah, I think for all of us, we had very strong personal connections to Ruth St. Denis, for me, Ruth St. Denis, and Ted Shawn's work. And so when we entered the exhibition, I know many of my colleagues had very strong emotional reactions to the exhibition because of the, I think it is also partly because of the way dance history is taught in the US. So I came to the US as an undergrad, and my undergraduate thesis project was about Ruth St. Denis. And so actually it was about Bakawali Naach, which was performed. It was like the case study that I was analyzing. And also as a young South Asian student, international student who had come to the US, this was my entry into American dance history. Ruth St. Denis, Bakawali Naach, Radha, the repertoire where she wears the sari on stage, several versions of choreographies where she wears the sari on stage. And so encountering that material, previously it was all mediated, it was videos, photographs as a young undergraduate student. And so to be confronted with that material as a professor who is here to teach dance history in the setting of a college and a college museum was really, it brought up a lot of emotions, it brought up a lot of, historical connections that individuals have had, but also cultures have had. And so I think for all of us, we felt very strong personal connections to the material. And so I think the process of writing and the process of not only experiencing the exhibit, but also writing the essays that we wrote allowed many of us to kind of encounter and unpack those emotions, not just the history that we each had with the material and with Ruth St. Denis and Ted Shawn's legacy, but also our own personal emotions and affective relationships to this history.
So five years have passed since the exhibition was here at WCMA, and you've had 5 years. Kevin, you mentioned that you had had enough of Ted and Ruth. You wanted to step away from your relationship to them, and I'm wondering if the 5 years have offered all of you some space to process the historical moment that we're in now, and what the legacy of Ted and Ruth represents now. And I'm bringing that up because the encounters that some of us had with the young people who go to school here at Williams College, all of them have graduated. That was 5 years ago. Our encounters with them and this material, that process is still going on. They had quite a different reaction to the exhibition than I would say than I did as an elder person. I grew up relating to Ted and Ruth in a different way, and so the encounter between a different generation and that material brought up things that it might not have surfaced as quickly if the exhibition had been in a different museum. So I really am interested in hearing what has happened for you all, for each of you, over the 5 years that we've had pulled back from that experience. What still resonates? What are you still wrestling with?
I guess maybe I'll go. Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, and I think when we were talking, I think I mentioned this, that there were ways, in my remarks about kind of like the archive and sort of being so excited about the archive, that process went into, for me, the exhibition process. And, I certainly approached both figures with the degree of kind of distance that I thought was necessary at the time, and certainly knew that things that they were doing in terms of sort of cultural appropriation in particular were things that were reverberating today through not only dance, but also cultural histories, art history, and all the things that we study. But they're seductive figures. It's easy to get seduced by St. Denis and Shawn. And their stories are complicated. And I don't know that anyone has yet sort of plumbed the depths of these two figures. And certainly in the amount of time that we had to create the exhibition, and then this longer gestation of the book, I feel to this day that my relationship with both of them is as fraught maybe as it was kind of initially, but it's because I had such a big crush on them in 2018 that and that crush kind of lingers a little bit, right? But it's over. But every once in a while, you'll see an image or you'll see a performance of their work, and you'll be like, oh yeah, I remember. Oh yeah, and you'll be kind of brought back in. And I think, in terms of how we did the exhibition, we wanted to sort of portray them as they portrayed themselves. And I think that, that still was the way that I would do it. But for me, what I learned a lot was that you create a beautiful exhibition and you create that about tough subjects, and people might only see the beautiful exhibition and not necessarily how you're contextualizing the tough subjects.
So Kevin, related to that, and please everybody jump in here, because Dance We Must opened on a college campus, and our students were really kind of the first big audience for that exhibition. Their reaction was less of the love affair that many of us grew up with. And so I'd really like to invite my colleagues in the dance department who are on the front line of this, and some of them are in the audience, who are on the front line of this. And so I'd really like to invite you to lean a bit into that, because that's part of what people might not know about what the exhibition unearthed.
Well, I would just admit that I wasn't in love with Ruth St, Denis and Ted Shawn. I would say really, I now realize, thinking about the 5 years, I now realize how much I was actually avoiding that relationship that I have to that legacy. I just, my focus had been elsewhere. I was really interested in modernism. I was, and yet they were so important in building this foundation, making dance possible for a huge group of people that created all kinds of new ideas in dance. It's not that I feel like I fell in love with them in these 5 years, but the opportunity to talk with Munjuli and Sandra and my other colleagues and to teach with this material, I think that I felt a much closer relationship with them, given that it's a complicated relationship, and I don't know that we could sit at dinner together and have a lovely time, but I think we would have an interesting conversation, and I would be interested at who else we might bring into the table that was not at the table at the time that they were working.
Munjuli?
Yeah, I think adding to what Erica was saying about the conversation, I think after the exhibition, when Kevin told us about the book and invited us to write for the book, the conversations that we had, Erica and I, and our student Sandy Steele, and also Du, who was at that time based in Thailand, we were having these really, I think, helpful conversations because, as I was saying, I had very strong emotional reaction, and I also had, it wasn't just the exhibition. I've had these emotions and these thoughts over many years because part of what I teach is about dance and race and other identity politics. And so I think my relationship with Ruth St. Denis's work and less of Ted Shawn's work, because I was more interested in Ruth St. Denis's work, I think that relationship has shifted in that I have more understanding of how to work with this material when there's young people involved. How do I, and we have talked about this with, in teaching this material, how do we approach it? What are the types of material we give to young people? How do we give them a background in dance history, in American politics, in racial relationships in the US, for them to also have a good grounding when they encounter material like this?
One of the things, thank you, Munjuli, one of the things that artists and human beings are always guilty of is appropriation, because you fall in love with something, or you are attracted to something that is not from where you are in the world. And I think that is, to me, that's one of the delightful things about being a human being, is to be curious about the globe, is to be curious about people who you are not. And given that these two human beings were artists, I think it's quite natural that they were seeking. They were going out into the world and seeking something. And so the young people who we teach here at Williams are also seekers, but I would say the rules of the game are different now. The rules of the game are different now. And so I'd really like to invite you all to talk about what you've learned about the rules of the game of being like an artist or a curator, a seeker now.
Well, if I just comment on that, also your previous question as well. For me, one of the things that really came out of the exhibition was the power of the costumes, because so much of the commentary was specifically about the costumes, not the paintings, not the photographs, but the physical costumes. Even, Munjulika, you mentioned you'd seen the photographs, you'd seen footage, but seeing that costume, and I found that really fascinating, because there's something about the black and white photographs or the paintings or the shaky black and white footage where you have this distance that was in the past, that was 100 years ago. But when you're confronted by a mannequin, perhaps your height, similar measurements, you can't escape from that. And people had, as we saw, really polarized reactions. No one was indifferent to the costumes. And I thought that was really fascinating. And from someone that studies material culture, that we can use this as a tool to tackle these complex topics. And I think one of the things that I have really learned, and in conversations with other scholars we've brought in at the Pillow while we're continuing to use this material, is that something can be beautiful and ugly. That these costumes can be beautiful. They're beautifully made. And I tended to be very, I'm there with a magnifying glass looking at the way these are made. But stepping back, this topic can be difficult and ugly. And that duality can exist side by side. And I think that was something that was, difficult for some people in the exhibition, that they, this beautiful painting or this beautiful, but it's a topic that makes me uncomfortable. So I think learning to have those conversations and to discuss the both sides of these pieces has been really exciting, but also to use these pieces, because this is a big collection of the costumes. That's what I'm going to mainly talk about, because I don't work with the photographs and the paintings. There is a lot of other material as well, but it's about 2,500 items, which are now all catalogued. So let's use those as part of this conversation. So now researchers are able to actually come and look at these pieces and have these conversations. But it's also proving a really interesting way to get conversation with the interns at Jacob's Pillow, just general people coming in. They'll often see a costume and come and look at that, because it's, an archive might seem a daunting place for some people, but you see something sort of relatable. So you get people in and then you can have these conversations. And I think not sort of putting them back in the trunks, not repacking this. We want to keep, now that we've let the genie out of the bottle, let's use it and let's talk about these pieces. So that's been really exciting for me. And also just acknowledging that, I primarily work with ballet from the same period and modern dance, but a lot of the cultural pieces that they were doing, I don't have the knowledge or the language. So bringing in other people, having these discussions has been really exciting. So one of my recent collaborations has been with Phil Chan, who's the founder of Final Bow for Yellowface, so looking at Asian appropriation in ballet primarily, but in modern dance. So that was a fascinating conversation, because he comes from a different side to me, but he'd never looked at an object. So he'd never looked inside the costume and felt the weight of it and looked at the detail. So I sort of brought him down to that level, but then he brought me back to looking at the larger story and the context, and how that can be very difficult for some people to look at that and be confronted with that. And it was really interesting to kind of bring our two sides on the same piece together.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you. Anybody else have any reflections on that? On what?
I love that. The costumes were the things that were the material in the exhibition that showed both sides. And I think because you could see sweat stains and you could see alterations and you could, and the exhibition, the smells were, you did well with the smells, so we got the smells. We froze all the things and it was all good. But yeah, in the archives we could smell it. But, and so I think that the opportunity to look really closely at those costumes was probably one of the things that really raised the students. I think that it wasn't typical for WCMA to do a lot of things with textiles at that point and costumes, and I think that students, and I know that from what we heard from students, was that some of the kind of pedestrian materials that Ruth was using in her stagecraft to create an image on stage that would have been brilliant and beautiful and would have conveyed something that when you looked at the costume in the bright lights of the gallery, you could say, oh wow, okay, well those are kitchen implements, or those are various things that she's buying from dollar stores basically, and I think it was the power of seeing something that in the paintings and in the photographs you have this kind of this artistic distance and a sort of you carry to those a kind of aesthetic criteria, that the costumes really were the bomb that was thrown in the exhibition that led to all of the discussions because of how they were made, what they were made of, and how you could see the actual literal sort of history of these garments and of these two people play out over time.
Thank you, Kevin. I just want to circle back to the presence of the body in the museum, which we just also experienced. And I would say the specialness of that, because museums are often, not now, but they were the home of inanimate objects in the past. And so we just witnessed the reconstruction of past bodies, of legacy work, into contemporary bodies. And so I'd like to invite Erica and Munjuli to talk a little bit about that process and its relationship to costumes and the representation of the ways that people moved in the past.
Well, there's a lot to say, but I guess the thing about the costumes in particular that is so fascinating and helpful, I think, in terms of really working with it is the ways in which the costumes were so integral to the work. It wasn't something you put on and performed choreography. It was, these pieces were really made for these costumes. So it was a conversation with costume and performer in a way that I think was really exciting and laid groundwork for a whole lot of other work that's been done since. And so having to be in partnership with a costume and a lot of fabric, for example, or the way that things may move or not move, or how they catch light or don't catch light, what you have to be aware of as a performer, it's a whole discipline in itself. And I feel like the Denis and Shawn legacy was really, they were really innovators in that way. And I've always loved, fabric and working with big skirts and all that kind of stuff. It's wonderful. And so for me, seeing those lived-in costumes, it felt, as a dancer, I felt very connected. But I also just felt really clear in my mind about how much they had actually done in terms of innovation for the rest of us coming forward. People, the young generations who were working in early modern dance, they were sewing all their own costumes. It was not glamorous. It was, everybody was in the trenches trying to find whatever they could find that would create the image that they wanted. Because we know you almost never have enough support as an artist to make anything. I've certainly cobbled costumes together more times than I can count. I'm sure you have too. So I think I have a deep appreciation, even though there were, of course, many issues with looking at the costumes. I also saw the detail and how much they cared. And I think it really relates to how they champion dance as a noble pursuit in America, because it wasn't. And especially, I need to say, especially St. Denis as a woman, to spend her entire life with this as her goal. Yeah, to perpetuate dance, to have dance be something that women could do and not have it be just a sexualized, objectified kind of role. And I do think we have a lot of to thank Ruth St. Denis for in that regard. And Ted Shawn, for his part, opening the field for men to be dancers. That's almost more radical at the time that they were working. And to, again, really acknowledge that this is work that people want to see, they want to experience it. It's not debased. There's nothing, it's just like any other art form. So I think the body became elevated through the work that they did and the way that they used costume, which, again, laid groundwork. Here we are, a dance department in a institution of higher learning where the body is sometimes kind of problematic. How do we talk about the body in academia? It's not an easy subject for people. So.
Thank you, Erica. Is there are there any questions for anyone who's assembled here today? Yes. Shout it out.
You may have mentioned this already, but where are these costumes now?
They're all at Jacob's Pillow in the archives there. They're also all available online on the Jacob's Pillow archives website. So they're not all photographed, but all the records are there, and anyone can look at those. And physically, they're in the basement of Blake's barn. So the red barn at Jacob's Pillow. They're all in acid-free tissue now, in beautiful acid-free boxes, and the trunks have now been catalogued as objects themselves because they are also beautiful and part of the history. So they're all stable, and yeah.
Are there any plans for having another exhibit somewhere?
I don't think in this form, but certainly at the Pillow each summer, some pieces from the collection are put on display. And we've loaned a piece since this. So yeah, I think now that the collection is in this condition, that pieces can be loaned hopefully in the future as these conversations continue. I think that's definitely a possibility.
But they will never be worn again.
Nope.
They're just
Absolutely not.
No one would want to wear them, believe me.
I've had some tough conversations with some marketing people for no, they cannot be worn.
Jordan?
Hi, thank you for your conversation here. Congratulations on the book. As we're talking about costume as a very visual indication of culture, I'm also thinking about gesture as a symbol of culture too. And I'm thinking about other dances that I've danced and I think back to like Nutcracker, like wow, it's a lot of appropriative things in there. And not only by costume, but by the gesture of these particular dances. And so how have you seen gesture as a sign of appropriation in this work too? And how do you combat that now as we try to modernize and think in this present moment and think about these works and these artists?
That's a tough one. Yeah.
I mean, thank you. I love that, and it's such a wonderful point to make. And I obviously we are very interested in gesture, and there's something about being working in movement where at a certain point in history it feels like there's nothing new that we can really do. Mm-hmm. So yes, Ruth St. and Ted Shawn, appropriated many cultures somewhat willy-nilly. I think that the thing that I think about with gesture is just be really clear about where is this coming from? Why am I doing this? If I'm choreographing something, for example, where is this really coming from? Because I know that it's not new. I know that I learned it somehow, somewhere in all of the different kinds of dance that I've watched and loved. So these things get passed on, but the idea of gesture is really interesting because it points partly to the ways in which dance get passed body to body, rather than being something that we only read about or write about. Those are wonderful things too, but the fact that my coach here, Ellen Cogan, she coached me for the solo that I performed today. And the idea that Ellen learned that piece, those gestures and those ideas from Jane Sherman, who was on tour with Denis and Shawn, and has written very eloquently about her experiences over that time. So there's something about gesture being passed on that I think is really interesting, and you're onto something there. And I don't really have an answer, but I just love that, the way that you put that, and it's something that we should think about more.
One of the things that I learned from Caroline when we were in the archives together was the limitations of gestures that were possible with a number of these costumes. I mean, I think that these weren't stretched fabrics. I mean, you can speak more to this, but the peacock, I mean, there were not all possible gestures possible in these costumes that they created.
Right. Yeah, I'd say particularly with Ruth's costumes, and you mentioned the connection to her costumes, and the dance and the costume were one. And I think even just the piece you just did, that would have looked so different without that costume. And that was a costume you could move in, but a lot of the pieces she had, were extremely restricting, and they were just sort of gestures and movements what she could do with these costumes. So I think that's definitely an interesting conversation to keep going. But
I just wanted to add to something that Erica said, which is also why it is that we want to do a gesture. I think when we are creating something or learning something, it's useful to ask why it is that we want to do it. And the example that comes to my mind, because my research is based in Bangladesh, and there's an emerging hip-hop dance movement in Bangladesh. And so, these young kids don't really know a lot about the history of the history and origin of hip-hop, Black people's history in the US. And so one of the things that I often ask them is, why do you want to do hip-hop? You're this young person in Bangladesh. What attracts you to it? What do you think hip-hop will allow you to say that you can't say by yourself with the traditions or the forms that are available to you right now? And so an interesting, I think we had this conversation when we were talking to our student collaborators for the essay, is where did many of these movements and gestures that Ruth St. Denis and Ted Shawn do, we can trace them, but we don't quite know who the people were who inspired them. And so that's also something to think about, is why it is that we want to do certain things.
Yeah. So there's an anonymous quality sometimes to movement. It becomes a part of, I think, what is passed, as my colleagues have said, from body to body, across space and time, across geographies, across culture. So gestures also, I think, as we know as human beings, can have so many, a multiplicity of meaning, depending on what day it is, what culture it is. And so I think you're talking about gesture, I think, Jordan, as you've learned it or probably performed it in ballet. Am I right about that? Or in general?
Yes, I don't want to take up too much time. Yes,
Yeah.
that's in dance. So this dance is about this particular culture, and so we're going to do these particular moves out of that culture. Just the way gestures can become appropriate.
Right. And so I'll just close by saying now I think in academia and in art and in the general public. We are trying to interrogate meaning more and where something comes from, its source, its history, its origin. Just today, I heard Macklemore, the hip-hop artist from Seattle, talk about how much hip-hop means to him as a human being, and that he really tries to convey its origin, you know, for himself and for his audience. And I was surprised by that. And I think that that is a part of this multi-generational thing that your generation is bringing to scholarship and to the public discourse. That's really important. Thank you all for coming to the exhibition if you did. And if you didn't get to see any of this, please come to the Pillow this summer and come to the archives and certainly buy the book and certainly come to the archives at the Pillow where you can see some of the objects from Dance We Must. Thank you so much.